The sun had barely broken the horizon when Clarence Rucker rolled his old truck into the gravel lot of Mayfield Lake. The world was still quiet. Dew clung to the grass. The lake shimmered like glass, and Clarence could already taste the peace he had waited weeks for. But that peace shattered in an instant. From behind him came the sharp crunch of fast footsteps, decisive, commanding, like someone marching onto a battlefield. Clarence turned, squinting against the low light, and saw her, clipboard in hand, short blonde hair pinned back, sunglasses perched on her head though the sun had barely risen. She walked with the certainty of someone who thought the world bent to her will. "You can't park that here," she snapped before he could even speak. Clarence blinked, caught between disbelief and irritation. He hadn't even unhitched his boat yet, and already the stranger was barking orders like a drill sergeant. What she didn't know, not yet, was that the man she was confronting wasn't trespassing at all. He wasn't just another fisherman trying his luck at the water's edge. No, Clarence Rucker owned the very lake she was guarding with her clipboard and sharp tongue. And by challenging him, she was about to set off a battle that would shake the entire community. And trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. But first, let me take you back to that moment when everything started. Clarence set the wrench down on the trailer hitch and straightened his back, the gravel crunching under his boots. The woman marched closer, every step carrying the weight of self-importance. Her clipboard was clutched like a badge of honor, her smile tight and brittle, the kind that never reached the eyes. "This lot is private," she declared sharply. "Community use only. You need to move that boat." Clarence studied her calmly. He was 47, built by years of labor and long mornings like this, and he'd learned that silence often unsettled people more than anger. Finally, he spoke, steady and polite. "Morning. You live here." "I'm on the HOA board," she replied, raising her chin as if those 4 letters gave her authority over the earth itself. "And you're not on the list of permitted lake users. This lake is restricted to the Mayfield Hills Fishing Club. You're trespassing." Clarence's gaze drifted past her, toward the still waters where mist curled like breath on glass. Nobody else was around. The lake looked exactly as it had when his father first brought him here as a boy. A place of peace, a place of memory. "Didn't see a sign," he said simply. "There's one posted near the pavilion," she snapped. "You must have missed it." He nodded slightly. "Fished here plenty of times. Never had a problem." "Well, you've got one now." She tapped her pen against the clipboard, sharp and impatient. "Either move your boat, or I call this in." Clarence inhaled slowly, his patience holding, but only just. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push back. Instead, he asked the one question that would turn the tide of this encounter. "You sure you want to push this?" The woman froze for a moment, as though she hadn't expected Clarence to stand his ground. "Excuse me?" she snapped, pressing the clipboard tighter to her chest. Clarence's voice stayed even, almost calm. "You might want to double-check your information. I think you're mistaken about who owns this lake." For a brief flicker, her face shifted, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. But pride is a stubborn thing, and she buried it beneath a laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Is that supposed to intimidate me? Do you know how long I've lived here?" Clarence didn't move an inch. His eyes locked with hers, steady, unshaken. "Do you know who purchased this lake 3 years ago? Who maintains it, pays taxes on it, and signed off on your fishing club's access in the first place?" Her grip on the pen faltered. For a second, her confidence cracked like thin ice under weight. Then she forced her composure back into place, lips curling into defiance. "You're bluffing." Clarence turned back to the trailer, calmly clipping the line back onto his polished aluminum boat. "All right, you do what you have to do." His tone carried no anger, no fear, just the quiet certainty of a man with nothing to prove. She scribbled his name furiously onto the clipboard, the scratch of her pen loud in the stillness of morning. "You'll be hearing from the board," she hissed. But Clarence wasn't bluffing. And Teresa Holcomb, the self-appointed guardian of Mayfield Lake, had just started a battle she couldn't win. And as we move forward, you'll see just how far she was willing to go to prove herself in charge, and how quickly the truth turned her world upside down. By 9 o'clock, Clarence had pushed his boat into the water and drifted quietly near the reeds on the lake's eastern edge. The morning was cool, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. He cast his line without urgency, the soft plop of the lure breaking the glassy surface. For a moment, peace returned. Just him, the lake, and the memory of his father's laughter echoing faintly in the stillness. But peace doesn't last when pride is wounded. From across the dock, a white golf cart came buzzing into view. Even at a distance, Clarence knew the posture, the clipped movements. Teresa Holcomb. Only this time she wasn't alone. Beside her sat a young man in a navy windbreaker, a radio clipped to his belt and uncertainty written across his face. The cart halted at the dock's edge. Teresa stepped off first, her stance wide and commanding, as though the wooden planks beneath her feet were a courtroom floor. She cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted across the water, "Clarence Rucker, this is your final warning." Clarence reeled in his line slowly, turning his chair with deliberate calm. He lifted a hand in casual greeting. "Morning again, Teresa. I've contacted the sheriff's office," she barked, voice echoing over the still lake. "You are in violation of HOA regulations. You are to leave the premises immediately." The man beside her shifted awkwardly, lowering his voice to whisper something in her ear. She snapped her head, silencing him before he could finish. Clarence leaned back in his chair, folding his hands across his lap. "That man with you," he called out. "Does he carry a badge, or just a walkie-talkie?" The young guard hesitated, caught between protocol and the calm defiance of the man before him. And in that hesitation, the balance of power began to shift. The young guard cleared his throat, stepping forward with forced authority. "Sir, can I ask what your business is on the lake?" Clarence nodded. "You can ask. I'm fishing." "Are you a resident of Mayfield Hills?" the guard pressed. "No." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore." Clarence pulled his tackle box closer, not rising from his seat. "You ever hear of Crescent Holdings?" The guard frowned, shaking his head. "Can't say I have." "Figures," Clarence said, his tone even, almost conversational. "They're a private trust. They bought this land and this lake 3 years ago. It's owned and managed by them. I'm the sole trustee." Teresa scoffed loudly, her voice slicing through the air. "You expect us to believe that? Some made-up company doesn't override decades of community use." Clarence didn't flinch. "Don't really care what you believe. The paperwork's filed with the Greene County Recorder's Office. All public record. You can look it up right now if you'd like." The guard's posture shifted. His eyes darted between Teresa's tight jaw and Clarence's calm certainty. Doubt flickered in his expression, quiet but undeniable. "Do you have identification?" the guard finally asked. "In the truck," Clarence replied. "But I'll show it to a deputy when they get here." "That's who you called, right?" The guard hesitated. Teresa's face flushed, her pen tapping against the clipboard in furious rhythm. "This lake has been part of our community for decades," she spat. "And I'll be damned if one man thinks he can roll in here, claim it and disrupt our peace." But Clarence only cast another line, his words calm, steady, cutting through her bluster. "I didn't disrupt anything, Teresa. You came to me." By the time Clarence pulled his boat from the water that afternoon, the sun was already heavy in the sky, beating down on the gravel lot. The silence inside his old truck was a welcome relief. No shouting, no clipboards, no threats. Just the creak of leather seats as he leaned back, exhaling slowly. He wasn't angry, not yet, but something deeper stirred within him, a quiet reminder of why this place mattered. 10 minutes later, he turned onto County Road 102, the pale green siding of his modest single-story home coming into view. On the porch, his old hound Jasper barked once, tail thumping against the wood. Clarence gave a faint smile, a wave, but didn't linger. Inside, the air was cool and familiar. He tossed his keys onto the hook by the door and reached for a framed photo on the shelf. The edges were worn, a crease running straight through the middle. In it, his father stood barefoot by the lake, a fish held high in triumph, while a 10-year-old Clarence grinned up at him. Jeans grass-stained, teeth crooked, eyes full of wonder. "Dad," Clarence muttered under his breath. "You'd have handled her better than I did." He set the picture down, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Teresa's voice still rang in his ears. Sharp, certain, dripping with judgment. She hadn't asked his name. She hadn't cared who he was. She'd decided what he was. Finally, Clarence stood and slid open the bottom drawer of a metal filing cabinet. From inside, he pulled a blue folder labeled Mayfield Lake, title and access. He spread the papers across the dining table. The deed transfer, his signature as trustee, the agreement with the HOA granting conditional access to the fishing club, renewable annually, subject to review. No renewal had been filed in 10 months. Clarence chuckled dryly. Guess they forgot who they were dealing with. The next morning, Clarence rose before dawn. He made coffee strong and black, the kind his father used to drink before heading out to the mill. While Jasper padded lazily across the floor, Clarence carried the blue folder into his study. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in months, and leaned back in his chair. "Reynolds and Price, attorneys at law," a crisp voice answered. "This is Clarence Rucker. I need to speak with Dan." Moments later, a deeper voice came on the line. "Clarence? Haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on?" Clarence flipped through the documents, the pages whispering against each other. "Need you to confirm something for me. Mayfield Lake, Crescent Holdings Trust. Still under my name. Give me 10 minutes. Clarence sipped his coffee, waiting. Outside, the sun climbed higher, casting light across the kitchen table where the deed lay open like a shield. The phone rang back. "All clear," Dan said. "Trust is active. Taxes paid up to date. You've got full control of the lake, shoreline, access points, the whole works. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're blowing smoke." Clarence gave a low hum. "That's what I thought. Someone giving you trouble? Neighbor with a clipboard." Dan chuckled. "Ah, one of those. Don't sweat it. Legally, you're untouchable. If they push, you push back with paper, not fists." Clarence smiled faintly. "Paper's heavier than most fists, if you throw it right." After hanging up, he closed the folder gently, like a man sheathing a weapon he rarely used. The fight wasn't about legality anymore. It was about pride. And pride, Clarence knew, was sharper than any hook. That Thursday evening, the Mayfield Hills clubhouse buzzed with chatter. Folding chairs scraped against polished floors, the smell of coffee and store-bought cookies filling the air. Teresa Holcomb stood at the front, clipboard clutched like a gavel, her expression stern, deliberate. "Neighbors," she began, her voice ringing with authority. "We have a problem. An outsider has been using our lake without authorization. When confronted, he refused to leave. He even mocked our rules." Murmurs rippled through the room. A few heads turned, uneasy. Some frowned in agreement, others exchanged skeptical glances. Teresa pressed on, raising her voice. "This man, Clarence Rucker, claims he owns Mayfield Lake. But ask yourselves, how could one stranger possibly own what has been ours for generations? It's absurd." A man in the second row cleared his throat. "But the lake's always been under Crescent Holdings, hasn't it? Didn't we sign that agreement years ago?" The words landed like a pebble dropped in still water. Silence followed. Teresa's smile was tight, brittle. "A technicality," she shot back quickly. "Paperwork shuffled by lawyers. We, the community, are the rightful stewards. What matters is tradition. If we allow this man to dictate terms, what's next? Locked gates? Membership fees? Losing everything we've built?" The room stirred again, emotions heating. Some nodded fiercely. Others looked uneasy, weighing the words. From the back, a soft voice spoke. "Maybe we should hear his side before we decide anything." Teresa's eyes flashed, pinning the speaker like a hawk. "His side?" she echoed coldly. "If we don't act now, we'll lose our lake. I propose a vote. Tomorrow we deliver a formal notice. He'll either comply or face consequences. Applause broke out, thin but growing, fed by her conviction. And just like that, the first lines of battle were drawn. Clarence was fixing a loose board on his back porch when his neighbor, Carl Whitman, strolled over, hands buried in the pockets of his flannel shirt. Carl was the quiet type, retired electrician, keeper of an immaculate garden, but his eyes carried news. "Evenin', Clarence," Carl began, rocking on his heels. "Heard you ruffled some feathers down by the lake." Clarence tightened a screw, not looking up. "Didn't know fishing counted as feather ruffling." Carl gave a small chuckle. "Depends who you ask. Teresa called a meeting last night. HOA's buzzing about you like hornets." Clarence finally glanced at him, brow raised. "That so? Word is, she's painting you as some outsider trying to muscle in." Folks were clapping, shouting, the whole show. She even called for a formal notice, sounded like a declaration of war. Clarence leaned back, wiping his hands on a rag. His face showed no anger, only that familiar calm that unsettled people more than shouting ever could. "And you? What do you think?" Carl shrugged. "I think you've got the papers to prove her wrong. But folks around here, they don't care much for papers. They care about stories. And Teresa tells a loud one." The silence stretched, filled only by Jasper's low bark in the yard. Clarence's eyes narrowed slightly, the weight of choice pressing on him. He could march into their clubhouse, slam the deed on the table, and end it with one motion. Or, he could let them stew in their assumptions, wait until their notice came, and then break it apart piece by piece. "Thanks, Carl," Clarence said finally, voice low. "Appreciate the warning." Carl nodded, turning back toward his yard. "Just watch your back, Clarence. Pride makes folks do foolish things." Clarence watched him go, the evening light sinking over Mayfield Lake. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. Saturday morning arrived bright and sharp, the kind of day when the lake shimmered like glass. Clarence was on his porch, sipping coffee, when he saw them coming. Teresa at the front, clipboard in hand, flanked by two HOA board members who looked more nervous than authoritative. She climbed the porch steps without invitation, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. "Mr. Rucker," she said, voice formal, "we're here on behalf of the Mayfield Hills Homeowners Association. Effective immediately, you are ordered to cease all use of Mayfield Lake. Continued violation will result in fines, legal action, and possible restriction of property access." She extended a manila envelope, chin tilted high. Clarence didn't reach for it. He simply studied her, calm and unblinking, before setting his coffee down on the railing. Finally, he took the envelope, tore it open, and scanned the printed pages. HOA letterhead. Bold words. Threats dressed in legal costume. When he looked up, there was the faintest curl of amusement at the corner of his mouth. "You practicing law now, Teresa?" Her jaw tightened. "This is official business." Clarence tapped the paper with one finger. Funny thing about official business, it usually comes signed by a judge, not a neighbor with a clipboard. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. The other coughed into his hand. Teresa's cheeks flushed, but her voice held firm. "We won't let you trample our community." Clarence folded the notice neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. "Then I suppose we'll let the right people decide. You've had your turn." He stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate ease. On the porch, silence hung heavy. For the first time, Teresa's confidence wavered. Because Clarence hadn't looked defeated. He'd looked ready. By Sunday evening, the manila envelope sat on Clarence's desk like an unopened challenge. He had read it twice, chuckled once, and then set it aside. Now it was time to answer. He called Dan Reynolds again, his lawyer, and laid the papers across the phone cord. They delivered their notice. Looks fancy. Means nothing. Dan sighed on the other end. HOAs love to posture. But if they're issuing threats in writing, that gives us leverage. "What do you suggest?" Clarence asked. "Draft a response. Firm, professional. Remind them the property and the lake are held under Crescent Holdings with you as trustee. Attach the deed. Politely warn them that continued harassment could expose the HOA to liability. Clarence's lips twitched in that almost smile of his. Paper heavier than fists, right? Exactly, Dan said. I'll have it typed up by morning. You can hand-deliver it if you want to make a statement. After hanging up, Clarence fed Jasper and poured himself another coffee. He wasn't a man who enjoyed conflict, but something about Teresa's arrogance, her certainty that she could bend truth with noise, stirred a slow fire inside him. He opened the blue folder again, sliding out the original deed. He traced the embossed seal with his thumb, the same seal his father once pointed out when teaching him that land was more than dirt. It was legacy. By the time the sun dipped behind Mayfield's pines, Clarence had made his choice. He would not wait in silence. Tomorrow, Teresa would receive an envelope of her own, and unlike hers, his would carry real weight. Monday evening, the clubhouse once again buzzed with voices. Teresa stood at the front, radiating authority, papers spread across the folding table like battle plans. The HOA board members sat stiffly at her side, nodding dutifully. The door creaked open. Heads turned. Clarence Rucker stepped in, broad shoulders filling the frame, Jasper at his heel on a short leash. He didn't raise his voice, didn't rush. He simply walked down the center aisle, the room parting around him like a tide. "Evenin'," he said evenly. "Heard you all had something to discuss." Teresa's smile was razor-thin. "Mr. Rucker, this is a private meeting." Clarence stopped at the front table, set down a crisp white envelope, and slid it toward her. "Consider this my RSVP." Teresa hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter on heavy legal stationery, Dan Reynolds' signature crisp at the bottom. The words were clear. Mayfield Lake and its surrounding access fall under the sole ownership of Crescent Holdings, with Clarence Rucker as trustee. Any attempt to restrict or harass him constitutes unlawful interference. Cease immediately, or legal remedy will be sought. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. One board member leaned closer, lips moving as he read the lines again. The other adjusted his glasses, eyes darting nervously toward Teresa. She cleared her throat, but her voice cracked faintly. This doesn't change community tradition. Clarence's calm drawl cut through her words. Tradition's fine, but law beats tradition. Every time. For the first time, murmurs in the crowd weren't in Teresa's favor. People exchanged glances, some even nodding slightly at Clarence's steady presence. He gave a small tip of his head, collected Jasper's leash, and walked back out the door. The envelope stayed on the table, heavy as stone. By midweek, the clubhouse felt different. Where once Teresa's words had been gospel, now they drew uncertain eyes and hesitant nods. The board members whispered in corners, their voices low, their papers shuffled more than read. Carl Whitman caught Clarence at the hardware store, leaning against a shelf stacked with paint cans. "You shook him good," Carl said, lowering his voice. "Half the folks are wondering if Teresa's been dragging us into a fight we can't win." Clarence only raised a brow. "Didn't know truth was such a burden." Carl chuckled. "Around here, noise carries farther than truth. But folks are starting to hear the difference." Meanwhile, at her kitchen table, Teresa fumed. She'd read Clarence's lawyer's letter a dozen times, searching for cracks. The HOA bylaws sat open in front of her, pages highlighted and tabbed, but nowhere could she find the authority to override a deed. Still, pride kept her digging. Pride and fear. If she lost this, she'd lose more than an argument. She'd lose face. By Friday evening, another meeting was called, but attendance was thinner. People came reluctantly, some muttering about wasting Saturdays on nonsense. Teresa raised her voice, insisting Clarence was bluffing, but even her closest supporters shifted uneasily. One woman finally spoke. "What if he's not bluffing? What if he's right? We're risking lawsuits over something we can't enforce." The room quieted. Teresa's jaw tightened, her nails tapping against the clipboard. For the first time, the cracks weren't just in whispers. They were showing in the open, and Clarence hadn't said a word. Teresa paced her living room late into the night, blinds drawn. The HOA bylaws spread across her dining table like a war map. Each highlighted passage was proof, in her mind, that Clarence's ownership couldn't stand against the will of the community. But deep down, she knew the truth. The letter from his lawyer had shaken her foundation. Still, she couldn't retreat, not after weeks of declaring herself the guardian of Mayfield Hills. To back down now would be humiliation, and humiliation was worse than losing. So she chose escalation. The next morning, Clarence awoke to find 2 freshly posted signs staked along the road leading to his dock. Private, HOA members only. Trespassers will be fined. They bore the HOA's logo, bold and official-looking, though no ordinance backed them. Neighbors driving by slowed down, eyebrows raised, whispers swirling. Had Clarence really been shut out? Or was Teresa bluffing again? Clarence stood by the signs, coffee mug in hand, studying them with that same quiet amusement. Jasper sniffed one post and lifted his leg against it, tail wagging. By noon, Clarence had already taken photos and sent them to Dan Reynolds. The lawyer's response came swift. Fabricating authority is dangerous. Document everything. We'll file an injunction if necessary. That evening, Clarence drove the signs to the edge of his property, leaned them against a tree, and left them there like discarded props from a bad play. He didn't tear them down in anger. He didn't shout. He simply removed their power with calm indifference. But Teresa saw the act for what it was, a public dismissal of her authority. And to a woman already cornered, dismissal felt like fire poured on open wounds. If signs couldn't hold Clarence back, Teresa decided whispers might. By Sunday, her phone buzzed nonstop as she called neighbor after neighbor, her voice tight with urgency. He's trying to buy the lake outright, she told one. He'll shut down access to everyone but himself, she warned another. He's just waiting for the chance to fence us all out. Each conversation was laced with the same poison. Fear. Fear that Clarence's quiet ownership meant the death of community freedom. At first, a few listened. Some even repeated her words, and by Monday evening, rumors ran like wildfire through Mayfield Hills. Families at the grocery store whispered, "Did you hear? Clarence wants the lake all to himself." Joggers slowed as they passed his dock, glancing suspiciously at the man who had lived among them peacefully for decades. But gossip, like smoke, doesn't always choke its target. Sometimes it drifts back toward the one who lit the fire. Clarence noticed the change. Neighbors less friendly, conversations cut short, but he never rushed to defend himself. Instead, he stayed steady. Fishing at dawn, waving politely, fixing Jasper's collar at the park. The more Teresa painted him as a tyrant, the more his quiet routine stood in contrast. And slowly, people began to question her narrative. After all, Clarence had lived there longer than most, never once closing the lake, never once demanding special treatment. Why would he start now? By the end of the week, whispers started turning back toward Teresa. Maybe she's just stirring trouble. Maybe she's the problem, not him. For a woman who thrived on control, doubt was the cruelest blow. And it was spreading faster than she could smother it. By Thursday, Teresa knew whispers weren't working fast enough. Too many neighbors were shrugging her off. Too many were watching Clarence without fear. So she decided to seize the spotlight. She called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, blasting emails with the subject line, "Protect our community before it's too late." The turnout was better than she'd hoped. Families filled folding chairs, curious if some new crisis had unfolded. Teresa stood at the front, clipboard in hand, voice sharpened to a blade. "Neighbors," she began. "We are under threat. Mr. Rucker is attempting to privatize the lake. If we don't act now, your children will lose their swimming spot. Your families will lose fishing rights, and this community will lose everything that makes it special." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few looked uneasy, others skeptical. Then Clarence walked in. Not storming, not angry. Just steady, hat in hand, Jasper trotting quietly beside him. He took a seat in the back row, folding his arms, watching. Teresa's voice rose, brittle with strain. There he is. The man who wants to take it all from you. She pointed at him dramatically, as though exposing a villain. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward Clarence. He didn't flinch. He simply spoke, calm and even. Lake's been open all my life. And it'll stay that way as long as I'm breathing. Got the papers to prove it. Anyone who'd like to see 'em, my door's open. The silence stretched, and then, a quiet clap. Carl Whitman, another neighbor joined. Then another. Applause spread, hesitant at first, then firm. Teresa's face went pale. She slammed her clipboard on the table, the crack echoing through the hall. But the sound wasn't power. It was desperation, and everyone knew it. The morning after the outburst, the HOA board gathered at the clubhouse without the usual fanfare. For once, Teresa wasn't the first to speak. She sat stiffly at the head of the table, lips pressed thin, while the others shifted in their seats. Finally, Greg Simmons cleared his throat. Teresa, last night wasn't good. People are angry. Some are embarrassed. Embarrassed? Teresa snapped. Embarrassed that I'm the only one fighting for this community? No, Greg said slowly. Embarrassed that you accused Clarence without proof. He invited everyone to see the deed. That was powerful. Honest. A few board members nodded. Even Marcy, usually Teresa's shadow, kept her eyes down, fiddling with her pen instead of speaking up. Teresa leaned forward, her voice low and biting. If we let him win, we lose all control. Do you want to hand this neighborhood over to one man? Control of what? Marcy finally murmured. We don't own the lake. We never did. The words landed like a stone dropped in water, rippling through the room. For the first time, Teresa realized the tide was shifting not just outside, but here, in the very council she commanded. That afternoon, Clarence was in his yard when Greg walked up, hat in hand. Mr. Rucker, he said, voice uneasy. I think it's time we made things right. The board's leaning your way now. Folks are tired of fighting. Clarence just gave a slow nod. About time. From her kitchen window, Teresa watched the exchange. She saw the handshake, saw Greg smile faintly, and in that moment, she knew. The wall she'd built around herself was crumbling. But Teresa wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Teresa barely slept. Every whisper, every handshake Clarence received replayed in her mind like a nightmare. The board's wavering was betrayal. The neighbors' applause humiliation. She told herself she had one option left. Force Clarence out by making his presence unbearable. That Saturday night, under cover of darkness, she slipped out with a bundle of laminated notices. Each bore bold red letters. Notice of violation, dock unauthorized. Access revoked. She taped one to Clarence's boathouse door, another to the railing, a third on the oak tree where he often tied Jasper's leash. By dawn, the false notices gleamed in the sunlight like official decrees. Joggers slowed, whispering again. A few shook their heads, but the seeds of confusion were planted. Clarence found them mid-morning. He peeled each one off carefully, folding them into neat squares. His face was calm, but his jaw set firm as he carried them inside. Minutes later, his phone was in his hand. Dan Reynolds on the line. This isn't just harassment anymore, the lawyer said grimly. This is fraud. Give me permission, and I'll file the injunction Monday morning. She'll have no ground left to stand on. Clarence agreed with a quiet, steady, do it. But before Monday came, Teresa made one more move. At dusk, she marched to Clarence's dock with 3 board members reluctantly trailing behind. Her voice rang out across the lake. As HOA president, I hereby declare this property closed to public access until further review. It was a theatrical decree, shouted for the benefit of anyone within earshot. But what Teresa hadn't counted on was the small crowd gathering along the shore. Neighbors with phones raised, recording every word. This time, the whole community would see her cross the line. The moment Teresa's declaration rang out across the lake, Murmurs rose from the shore. Neighbors who had gathered out of curiosity now watched with phones lifted high, their screens glowing in the dusk. Children tugged at their parents' hands, whispering, "Why is she yelling at Mr. Rucker?" Clarence didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped forward on the dock, Jasper at his heel, and said evenly, "You don't have that authority, Teresa. The lake's mine. Been mine long before your board, long before your rules. And it'll stay open, same as always." The crowd stirred. This wasn't anger, it was clarity. For the first time, everyone could see the contrast. Teresa's shrill command against Clarence's steady truth. Greg Simmons, standing reluctantly beside her, finally broke. "He's right," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "The board has no claim. We've been led wrong." He stepped away from her side, hands raised. "I won't be part of this anymore." Gasps rippled through the neighbors. Then Marcy followed, mumbling, "Me neither," before slipping into the crowd. Teresa's face flushed red. "Traitors," she hissed, but the word only made her sound smaller. From the crowd, Carl Whitman called out, "Enough's enough, Teresa. We've all seen what you're doing. This stops now." Applause followed, not for Teresa, but for Clarence, who simply tipped his hat in quiet acknowledgement. Teresa looked around wildly, realizing for the first time she stood alone. No board, no neighbors, no allies. Only her voice, trembling with rage, echoing uselessly over water that no longer listened. And the recordings, already spreading through Mayfield Hills, would ensure her fall was complete. By Monday morning, the videos had spread through every neighborhood inbox, every community group chat. Teresa's rant on the dock, her official decree, her board's public defection, none of it could be spun. She was exposed. The lawyer's injunction landed that same afternoon. A crisp document barred the HOA from interfering with Clarence's property again. The board, now fractured and ashamed, called an emergency vote. For the first time in years, Teresa was out. Stripped of her presidency, stripped of her power. She left the clubhouse without ceremony, clutching a box of papers and framed certificates no one cared about. Neighbors didn't jeer, didn't clap. They simply looked away, tired of the chaos she had sown. Clarence, meanwhile, was back on his dock that evening. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, Jasper lying at his feet, tail flicking lazily. A few kids splashed near the shallows, parents chatting nearby. Life had returned to its natural rhythm. Simple, shared, unclaimed by any one person. Greg walked over, clearing his throat. "Mr. Rucker, on behalf of the board, I'm sorry. We should have stood up sooner." Clarence gave a small nod, eyes on the horizon. "Lake don't belong to me alone. It belongs to all who respect it. That's all I ever wanted." As the sun dipped, painting the water gold, the tension of months finally eased. The community knew peace again, and Clarence knew he had kept his word. Teresa's window blinds stayed shut in the days that followed. Her voice, once the loudest in Mayfield Hills, was reduced to silence. And the lake, eternal and calm, carried on, untouched by pride, stronger than control, belonging only to itself and those willing to honor it.